History books will tell you when humanity first met the stars. They will never tell you whose front porch it happened on. The rain had been falling for nearly 3 hours when Daniel Brooks finally switched off the porch light, convinced that no one in their right mind would be out on a Wednesday night like this. His small white house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac outside Cedar Ridge, Colorado, where the loudest sound after sunset was usually the distant rumble of freight trains or the wind brushing through old pine trees. The scent of wet earth drifted through the slightly open kitchen window as the coffee maker clicked off with a tired little pop. Daniel rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock above the refrigerator. 11:47. Another long shift repairing heating systems across town had left his shoulders sore and his hands rough from years of honest work. He was halfway through washing his favorite coffee mug when 3 slow knocks echoed through the house. Not urgent, not frightened, just deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. He frowned. Nobody visited this late. His elderly neighbor always called first. Delivery drivers never came after dark. Teenagers usually pounded on doors before running away laughing. These knocks carried an odd kind of patience, almost as though whoever stood outside believed waiting politely was the most natural thing in the universe. Daniel dried his hands on a kitchen towel and walked toward the front door. Through the frosted glass, he could make out only the silhouette of a tall, slender figure standing perfectly still beneath the rain. No umbrella, no movement, no sign of discomfort despite the cold spring night. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The woman standing there looked unlike anyone he had ever seen, though at first his tired brain desperately searched for ordinary explanations. Maybe a movie production, maybe an elaborate costume, maybe some kind of promotional event. Her long silver-white hair shimmered beneath the porch light like polished silk despite the falling rain. Her elegant ivory-colored coat appeared woven from a fabric that reflected tiny points of light with every movement, as though faint stars had been stitched into its surface. Her face was calm, almost impossibly composed, with luminous pale skin and clear gray-blue eyes that seemed to study everything at once. She was taller than Daniel by several inches, yet carried herself with effortless grace instead of intimidation. She tilted her head slightly, listening to something only she could hear. Then she smiled with visible relief. "Greetings," she said in careful English, every word pronounced with remarkable precision, though the rhythm sounded unfamiliar. "May I confirm that this residence belongs to the dominant governing authority of planet Earth?" Daniel blinked twice. "I'm sorry, what?" She glanced at a thin crystal device resting against her wrist. Its faint blue glow flickered uncertainly before fading altogether. Her expression changed for the first time. Confusion. "Navigation indicates successful arrival," she murmured softly. "Architectural scale does not match diplomatic projections." Daniel looked behind her. The empty street glistened beneath rows of yellow streetlights. Every house sat dark except his own. No cameras. No television crew. No practical joke waiting to happen. "Are you looking for City Hall?" he asked. "Because you're definitely at the wrong place." She considered his answer with complete seriousness. "This structure answered my approach request." "You mean you knocked?" "Correct. Entry protocol requires respectful acknowledgement before crossing another civilization's threshold." Daniel almost laughed, but something stopped him. Nothing about her expression suggested humor. She genuinely believed every word she was saying. A cool breeze carried another wave of rain across the porch. Tiny droplets landed on her hair, yet instead of becoming wet they simply rolled away as though gravity itself had changed its mind. Daniel noticed she had no luggage, no vehicle, and no visible phone. Only that strange bracelet and an expression balanced somewhere between hope and uncertainty. She looked less like someone arriving for an invasion and more like a traveler afraid she had missed the right stop. He cleared his throat. "Well, whoever you are, you're getting soaked standing out there." She looked up at the rain with mild curiosity, as if she had only just remembered it existed. "Environmental conditions remain acceptable. Maybe for you," Daniel said, stepping aside and holding the door open. "But where I come from, we usually invite guests inside before asking questions." For the briefest moment, the woman's eyes widened. She placed one graceful hand against her chest, lowered her head with quiet reverence, and whispered something in a language that sounded like distant music carried across frozen lakes. Then she looked back at Daniel with unmistakable gratitude. Neither of them realized that somewhere beyond the clouds, hidden far above Earth's atmosphere, billions of silent observers had just witnessed the single decision that would determine humanity's first impression upon the stars. Daniel stepped back as the woman crossed the threshold with slow, deliberate grace, pausing just inside the doorway, as though the worn hardwood floor carried ceremonial importance. The rain continued whispering against the windows while warm air from the furnace drifted through the living room. She quietly removed her luminous coat and folded it with astonishing precision before placing it neatly beside the door. Every movement seemed practiced over a lifetime, yet filled with genuine curiosity. Her silver-white hair caught the soft yellow glow from the ceiling light, and for the first time Daniel noticed that her eyes were not simply gray or blue. Tiny rings of pale gold shimmered around each pupil whenever she focused on something unfamiliar. She looked around the modest room with silent fascination. The old fabric couch, the bookshelf filled with mystery novels, a faded photograph of Daniel and his parents standing beside a fishing boat many summers ago, a pair of muddy work boots resting on a rubber mat. She observed each object with equal attention, as though nothing in the room was ordinary. Daniel cleared his throat. "Can I get you something to drink?" She turned toward him immediately. "You are offering shared resources before formal negotiation." Her expression softened. "Your civilization places remarkable value upon trust." Daniel blinked. "It is just coffee. Or tea if you would rather have that." She tilted her head. Coffee is the beverage that increases mental alertness while simultaneously encouraging social conversation. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You already know what coffee is. I have studied approximately 483 million records concerning your species." She paused. "I have never smelled it." That answer somehow made perfect sense and no sense at all. Daniel walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and listened as water rushed against stainless steel. Behind him, he could hear gentle footsteps. She had followed him, though she remained respectfully several feet away. Steam slowly rose from the kettle while the familiar aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the room. The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment and inhaled carefully, almost reverently. "The chemical profile is unexpectedly comforting," she whispered. "Our databases described it as bitter." "It is," Daniel replied with a smile. "People still love it." She opened her eyes. "Humans willingly enjoy bitterness." "Sometimes." Daniel shrugged. "Depends on the day." A faint smile appeared on her face, small enough that most people would have missed it. "That explains many historical records." Daniel laughed before he could stop himself. The sound echoed through the quiet kitchen. She looked genuinely pleased that she had produced such a reaction, making a small note on the glowing crystal device around her wrist. Daniel poured coffee into his favorite ceramic mug and warm tea into another cup after deciding that offering a stranger caffeine at midnight might not be the best idea. He slid the tea gently across the table. She studied the cup for several seconds before carefully wrapping both hands around it. "Heat transfer," she murmured. A gesture of comfort. Daniel leaned against the counter. "Actually, it is mostly because the cup is hot." She looked thoughtfully at the cup again. "Your explanation does not invalidate the emotional outcome." Daniel had no answer for that. Silence settled comfortably between them. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the old refrigerator hummed in the corner. Finally he spoke. "I never caught your name." She placed one hand lightly over her heart. "I am Lysara, first envoy of the Celestial Accord." She hesitated before adding, "Although according to my navigation system, I appear to have arrived somewhere entirely unexpected." Daniel nodded toward the front window where identical houses stretched quietly down the sleeping street. "Believe me," he said with a tired smile, "this neighborhood has that effect on a lot of people." High above the dark clouds, hidden beyond the reach of every telescope on Earth, countless silent observers continued watching. They expected political negotiations, military caution, or displays of technological superiority. Instead, they witnessed their first contact with humanity begin over a warm drink, an awkward joke, and two strangers discovering that kindness required no translation. Daniel carried his coffee into the living room while Lysara followed with measured, graceful steps, her eyes wandering across every corner of the small house, as though she had entered a museum preserving the earliest memories of an unfamiliar civilization. The room was quiet except for the ticking wall clock and the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. She paused before a framed photograph resting on the fireplace mantel. It showed Daniel as a teenager standing beside his father, both covered in dust after repairing an old pickup truck. His mother stood between them, laughing at something outside the frame. Lasara studied the picture for several silent seconds. "This visual record carries emotional significance," she said softly. "Your family unit appears closely bonded." Daniel smiled without realizing it. "That was about 15 years ago. My parents are gone now, but I never had the heart to put the picture away." Lasara lowered her gaze respectfully. "Among my people, memories are preserved within living archives. Yet I believe this simple image performs the same purpose." Daniel looked at the faded photograph differently after hearing those words. It had always been an old picture to him. Suddenly it felt like something much larger. Lasara slowly continued, exploring the room. Her attention settled on an old acoustic guitar leaning beside the bookshelf. She reached toward it, hesitated politely, then looked back at Daniel. "May I?" He nodded. "Go ahead. I have not played much since college." She carefully lifted the instrument, turning it over with remarkable delicacy. Her fingertips lightly brushed the strings, producing a soft chord that filled the room with warm vibration. She closed her eyes again. "Remarkable," she whispered. "Primitive materials producing emotional resonance through controlled tension." Daniel laughed. "You make it sound much more impressive than it really is. Perhaps your species underestimates beauty because you encounter it every day." The sentence lingered in the room long after she finished speaking. Daniel sat down on the couch, while Lasara returned the guitar exactly where she had found it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Certainly. You said you studied humans before coming here. Then why knock on my door instead of going to Washington, New York, or somewhere important?" For the first time since entering the house, uncertainty crossed her face. She activated the crystal device on her wrist. Thin lines of pale light floated briefly above it before collapsing into scattered fragments. "My navigation array experienced an unexpected failure during atmospheric insertion. My designated coordinates disappeared." She paused. "Your residence became the nearest compatible point of diplomatic contact." Daniel frowned. "Compatible? Your dwelling emitted indicators associated with stability." She looked around the modest home again. Consistent energy usage. Evidence of long-term habitation. Family history. Signs of self-maintenance rather than luxury. Probability models identified this location as appropriate for peaceful first contact. Daniel stared at her. "My old furnace and overdue mortgage somehow made me qualified to represent Earth?" A faint smile appeared again. "The algorithms valued authenticity over prestige." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "Those algorithms definitely have a strange sense of humor." Before either of them could continue, a sudden bark shattered the silence. Both turned toward the back hallway as a large golden retriever trotted into the room, his tail wagging enthusiastically despite being awakened from sleep. Cooper stopped several feet from Lasara, sniffed the air cautiously, then tilted his head in obvious confusion. Daniel smiled. "I forgot you had not met my roommate." Lasara remained perfectly still, watching the dog with fascination. "This is the companion species known as Canis lupus familiaris." Cooper took 2 more careful steps before pressing his nose gently against the back of her hand. Lasara looked at Daniel in visible surprise. "He has accepted me." Daniel scratched behind Cooper's ears. "Congratulations. You passed the hardest interview in this house." Cooper responded by leaning comfortably against Lasara's leg, his tail sweeping happily across the hardwood floor. She slowly reached down and stroked his golden fur with gentle curiosity. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, lighter than anything Daniel had heard from her so far. Hidden beyond Earth's skies, countless distant observers watched their envoy receive the first official welcome from humanity. It had not come from a president, a general, or a scientist. It had come from an old family dog who simply decided that the stranger at the door felt like someone who belonged inside. Cooper eventually curled up beside the fireplace with the complete confidence that only an old family dog could possess, leaving Daniel even more puzzled than before. The golden retriever had spent years barking at delivery drivers, squirrels, and the occasional deer wandering too close to the backyard fence. Yet tonight he had welcomed a visitor from another world without a moment of hesitation. Lasara sat quietly on the opposite end of the couch, gently warming her hands around the teacup that had long since cooled. She did not seem disappointed. Instead, she appeared to enjoy simply holding it. Among your people, she said softly, objects often continue serving an emotional purpose after their practical function has ended. Daniel looked at the cup and shrugged. I guess that is true. Sometimes it is nice just to hold something warm. She nodded, thoughtfully, making another brief notation on the crystal device resting against her wrist. The faint glow flickered once more before dimming. This time it did not recover. Lasara studied the silent surface for several seconds, then slowly lowered her hand. Communication has completely ceased. Daniel straightened in his seat. You mean your people cannot reach you? At the present moment, no. Her voice remained calm, but the silence after those words carried a weight that had not existed before. My primary navigation array failed before atmospheric entry. The emergency beacon depended upon the same quantum synchronization network. Without it, I cannot determine my exact location relative to my vessel. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. So, you are stranded? She hesitated, searching carefully for the correct word. Temporarily misplaced. Daniel could not help smiling. That sounds a lot nicer than stranded. Language often determines emotional resilience, she replied. My instructors considered that an important diplomatic principle. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Can I ask something without sounding rude? You have demonstrated remarkable restraint. Please continue. Why send only one person? Lasara looked toward the rain-covered window where reflections from the porch light shimmered across the glass. Because first impressions cannot be repeated. Her voice grew quieter. Large fleets inspire fear. Great displays of technology inspire caution. We believed a single traveler carrying no visible weapon would communicate peaceful intent more clearly than an armada. Daniel slowly nodded. That actually makes sense. Every civilization reaches a moment when it must decide whether to greet the unknown with an open hand or a closed fist. She turned toward him again. Tonight, your species has begun making that decision. Daniel laughed nervously. You keep saying my species like I speak for 8 billion people. Do you not? Absolutely not. He pointed toward himself. I fix furnaces, forget birthdays, and occasionally burn grilled cheese sandwiches. Nobody elected me to represent Earth. For the first time since. Arriving, Lasara smiled openly. It transformed her entire expression, replacing regal composure with something unexpectedly warm. That, she said, is precisely why your response possesses such scientific value. Daniel frowned. Scientific. Had I been welcomed by a ruler, their behavior might have been influenced by politics. Had I met a military commander, strategy would shape every conversation. Instead, I encountered an ordinary citizen acting without preparation, instruction, or expectation of recognition. She folded her hands quietly in her lap. Your kindness carries exceptional evidentiary weight. Daniel stared at her, unsure whether to laugh again or feel overwhelmed. Somewhere far beyond the storm clouds, invisible sensors recorded every spoken word inside his modest living room. Billions of distant observers waited in complete silence while sophisticated translation systems analyzed every gesture, every pause, and every expression. Yet no algorithm predicted what happened next. Daniel stood, walked into the hallway, opened the small closet beside the front door, and returned carrying a neatly folded blanket. He placed it gently beside Lasara. It gets pretty chilly here after midnight, he said. You can use this if you want. She looked at the blanket as though it were something priceless. Her fingers brushed the soft fabric with quiet amazement before she raised her eyes toward Daniel. No royal ceremony, no diplomatic protocol, and no advanced technology had prepared the first envoy of the Celestial Accord for the simple generosity of a man who assumed every unexpected guest deserved to be comfortable before morning arrived. The storm had finally begun to drift east, leaving only scattered raindrops sliding down the windows as the first hint of midnight silence settled over the neighborhood. Daniel unfolded the old blanket across the far end of the couch and pointed toward the hallway. The bathroom is the second door on the left if you need anything. There are extra towels under the sink. Lasara looked at him with genuine curiosity. You are granting unrestricted access to your private residence after knowing me for less than one. Planetary rotation. Daniel smiled tiredly. Where I grew up, Trusting somebody has to start somewhere. She lowered her eyes thoughtfully, repeating the sentence almost as if committing it to memory. Trusting somebody has to start somewhere. Cooper lifted his head from the rug, stretched lazily, then wandered over to rest beside Lysara once again. She gently scratched behind his ears, and the old dog answered with a satisfied sigh. He continues choosing proximity, she observed. Animals usually know things we do not, Daniel replied. Or maybe he just likes anyone who sits still long enough. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. It was becoming easier now, lighter than before, and Daniel noticed that every time she laughed, the faint golden rings within her eyes shimmered more brightly. She reached into the inner pocket of her elegant coat and carefully removed a small crystal sphere no larger than a marble. It floated a few inches above her palm, casting delicate streams of pale light across the room. Daniel instinctively leaned forward. That is incredible. It is only a personal archive, Lysara explained. Its function is to preserve meaningful experiences. The tiny sphere slowly rotated, projecting soft images no larger than photographs suspended in the air. Daniel saw impossible cities stretching beneath brilliant skies, elegant towers woven into mountains of crystal, rivers reflecting unfamiliar constellations, and enormous gardens where glowing trees curved gracefully around quiet lakes. Everything looked peaceful. There were no towering weapons, no armies, only architecture that seemed designed as much for beauty as for purpose. Daniel stared without speaking. That is your home. She nodded. The capital world of the Celestial Accord. He shook his head slowly. It is beautiful. Lysara looked toward the floating images before quietly answering. Tonight, I discovered something equally beautiful. Daniel frowned. You mean my little house? Not the structure. She looked directly at him. The behavior within it. Before Daniel could respond, the crystal sphere suddenly dimmed. Every projection dissolved into tiny sparks before disappearing. Completely. Lysara's expression changed at once. She carefully caught the sphere as it fell back into her hand. Its reserve energy has been exhausted. Can you recharge it? Daniel asked. She hesitated. Normally, yes. My vessel would restore every system automatically. She looked toward the silent device on her wrist. Without contact, I must conserve everything that remains. Daniel glanced around the room, thinking, well, tomorrow we will figure something out. Tomorrow, she repeated softly. Sure. We will call somebody. Maybe a university. Maybe an observatory. Somebody smarter than me. Lysara tilted her head with visible confusion. You intend to continue assisting me? Daniel looked genuinely surprised by the question. Of course. Even after learning that I am not from your world. Especially after learning that. The answer came so naturally that Daniel did not realize how extraordinary it sounded. Lysara remained silent for several seconds, her gaze fixed upon him with quiet wonder. Far beyond Earth's atmosphere, countless observers monitored the exchange with increasing fascination. Statistical models had predicted caution, suspicion, and prolonged verification before trust could emerge. Instead, the ordinary human sitting in a modest living room had repeatedly chosen compassion without asking what reward might follow. Entire panels of analysts quietly suspended their prepared reports as new behavioral data streamed across their displays. One conclusion began appearing with remarkable consistency. Humanity's defining strength might not be intelligence, technology, or physical endurance. It might simply be the remarkable habit of treating strangers like guests before deciding whether they deserve to become friends. As the old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, Daniel switched off the living room lamp, leaving only the soft glow from the kitchen illuminating the quiet house. Cooper settled comfortably between them, already asleep. Outside, the clouds finally parted, revealing a sky filled with silent stars. Neither Daniel nor Lysara noticed that one of those stars lingered in exactly the same place, watching patiently through the darkness until dawn. Morning arrived quietly over Cedar Ridge. Thin beams of golden sunlight slipped through the kitchen blinds, replacing the silver glow of the previous night's storm with the comforting warmth of an ordinary Thursday. Daniel woke to the familiar smell of fresh pine drifting through the open window and the unmistakable sound of Cooper's tail tapping against the hardwood floor. For one brief moment, He wondered whether the remarkable visitor from the night before had simply been an unusually vivid dream. Then he stepped into the living room and found Lasara standing beside the front window, wrapped neatly in the blanket he had offered her. She was watching the neighborhood awaken with quiet fascination. Children waited for the school bus at the corner, while a mail carrier slowly drove from house to house. A man jogged past wearing bright orange headphones, completely unaware that the first extraterrestrial envoy ever to reach Earth was observing his morning exercise with scientific curiosity. They begin their routines with remarkable consistency, Lasara said without turning around. Your civilization appears to value ordinary mornings. Daniel smiled as he walked into the kitchen. Most people do not realize how valuable ordinary is until it disappears. She remained silent for a moment before softly replying. That statement should be preserved. While coffee brewed, Daniel placed bread into the toaster and searched through the refrigerator. I hope you eat something similar to humans, he said. Otherwise, breakfast might become very interesting. Lasara stepped closer, watching every movement with careful attention. My physiology can safely process many forms of organic nutrition. However, this will be my first opportunity to experience authentic human cuisine prepared inside a private residence. Daniel laughed. Well, do not expect anything fancy. Eggs, toast, and fruit are about the limit of my culinary skills. Authenticity possesses greater research value than perfection. A few minutes later, they sat together at the small wooden table beside the kitchen window. Sunlight reflected gently across the polished surface while Cooper rested beneath the chairs, patiently waiting for crumbs that Daniel inevitably dropped. Lasara carefully examined the slice of buttered toast before taking a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. Simple ingredients, she whispered, yet remarkably satisfying. Daniel shrugged. That describes most good breakfasts. She looked toward him with thoughtful curiosity. Your people repeatedly transform necessity into comfort. Daniel considered the comment while pouring another cup of coffee. Maybe because comfort is easier to share. Before Lasara could answer, the crystal device on her wrist suddenly emitted a faint pulse of pale blue light. Both of them froze. The glow lasted only 2 seconds before fading once more. She immediately touched the device, studying the silent display. A residual synchronization signal, she said quietly. Someone is searching for me. Daniel leaned forward. Can they find you? Not yet. The signal was incomplete. However, they are closer than before. She lifted her eyes toward the clear morning sky beyond the window. My people will not abandon their envoy. Daniel followed her gaze. Above the quiet neighborhood stretched nothing but bright blue skies and slow-moving clouds. Everything looked perfectly normal. Yet something about the brief pulse unsettled him. At almost the same moment, hundreds of miles away inside a secure aerospace monitoring facility, an automated detection system registered an unexplained burst of electromagnetic energy lasting exactly 1.9 seconds. The anomaly appeared and disappeared so quickly that most operators assumed it was harmless interference. One analyst, however, marked the event for further review before forwarding the report to a supervisor. No alarms sounded. No emergency meetings were called. The file simply entered a growing stack of unexplained observations waiting for someone to notice the pattern. Back in the quiet kitchen, Daniel reached for the empty breakfast plates while Lasara gently folded the blanket with the same care she had shown the night before. What happens now? He asked. She looked at him with calm certainty. Now your world begins asking questions it never imagined yesterday. Daniel smiled faintly. Then I guess we had better find some answers before everyone else catches up. Outside, the neighborhood carried on exactly as it always had, unaware that history had quietly awakened alongside another ordinary American morning. The rest of the morning passed with surprising normality, a quality Daniel had begun to appreciate more than ever. He loaded his toolbox into the back of his aging pickup truck while Cooper watched from the porch and Lasara stood quietly near the front door, carefully observing another ordinary ritual of human life. The neighborhood had fully awakened. Lawn mowers hummed in the distance. Children laughed as bicycles rolled down quiet sidewalks, and the smell of freshly cut grass drifted through the cool mountain air. To Daniel, it was simply another Thursday. To Lasara, it was the first complete morning she had ever witnessed on Earth. Your people appear remarkably comfortable living beside one another, she said as an elderly neighbor waved cheerfully from across the street. Daniel returned the wave without hesitation. That is Mrs. Henderson. She has lived over there longer than I have lived here. Lasara watched the woman disappear inside her house. You acknowledged her without strategic purpose. Daniel looked puzzled. She is my neighbor. Exactly. Her eyes reflected sincere curiosity. Among advanced civilizations, casual trust between unrelated individuals gradually became uncommon. Efficiency replaced familiarity. Daniel leaned against the truck door before answering. Maybe that is why people around here still stop to say hello. It reminds us we are not living alone. Lasara quietly stored the observation in memory. Before Daniel could start the engine, her wrist device emitted another brief pulse. This time the glow lasted slightly longer, forming delicate geometric symbols that floated only inches above her hand before dissolving into the morning air. Her expression changed immediately. The search pattern has intensified, she whispered. They have narrowed my estimated position. Daniel looked toward the empty blue sky. Nothing unusual appeared overhead. How much time do you think we have? Perhaps several of your hours. Perhaps less. She paused. The probability continues changing. At that exact moment, nearly 800 miles away, a second unexplained electromagnetic event appeared across multiple civilian satellites. Independent monitoring stations registered identical readings within fractions of a second. What had seemed like harmless interference only hours earlier now formed a measurable pattern. Inside secure government facilities, analysts quietly reopened the file that had nearly been forgotten. Still, no one imagined the source was an interstellar diplomatic mission unfolding in a peaceful Colorado suburb. Daniel reached into his pocket and removed his truck keys before placing them back inside again. I cannot leave you here by yourself. Lasara looked genuinely surprised. Your employment obligations are important. They are. Daniel smiled. But explaining to my boss that I missed work because an alien ambassador accidentally moved into my living room would probably sound unbelievable. A faint laugh escaped her lips. Your humor continues appearing during stressful circumstances. That is another human habit. He closed the truck door. We joke when we are nervous. Cooper barked happily as though approving the decision. Daniel looked toward the house. Come on. We will stay inside until we know what we are dealing with. They stepped back through the front door just as a dark sedan rolled slowly past the end of the street. It did not stop. It simply continued around the block before disappearing behind a row of pine trees. Daniel barely noticed it. Lasara did. Her eyes followed the vehicle until it vanished from sight. Someone is observing this location, she said quietly. Daniel frowned and looked outside again. The street appeared completely ordinary. A father helped his daughter carry a backpack toward the school bus. A gardener unloaded bags of soil from an old pickup. Wind rustled fresh green leaves across the sidewalks. Everything seemed perfectly peaceful. Yet somewhere beyond those familiar sounds, invisible events had already begun pulling distant worlds closer together. Above Earth, hidden behind daylight and beyond the reach of ordinary vision, one silent observation vessel adjusted its position by less than a single degree. The movement was almost imperceptible, but throughout the celestial accord, every scientist, diplomat, and historian watching the mission understood its meaning. The evaluation phase had ended. The first decision about humanity was about to begin. The quiet tension inside the house grew heavier with every passing minute, not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. The clock continued ticking above the fireplace. A lawn sprinkler hissed somewhere across the street. Cooper slept peacefully beside the window, completely unconcerned by the invisible currents gathering around the little neighborhood. Daniel stood in the kitchen rinsing breakfast dishes while Lasara watched sunlight dance across the backyard. Your world remains beautifully unaware, she said softly. Most mornings are like that, Daniel answered. People are busy getting kids to school, going to work, wondering what to cook for dinner. Nobody expects history to interrupt breakfast. Lasara smiled gently. Perhaps that is why history chooses such moments. Before Daniel could reply, the crystal device around her wrist suddenly awakened with greater intensity than ever before. Pale blue light spread across the room in delicate geometric patterns that hovered silently in the air. Unlike the previous signals, these shapes remained stable. Lasara immediately straightened. Her expression became both relieved and solemn. The communication bridge has been restored. Daniel instinctively stepped closer. Can they hear you now? She nodded once. They can. The floating symbols slowly merged into a translucent sphere no larger than a basketball. Within its shimmering surface appeared countless streams of light moving like distant galaxies. There were no faces, no voices at first, only an overwhelming sense of intelligence observing from unimaginable distances. Lasara lowered her head respectfully. First Envoy Lasara reporting. Initial contact completed. Personal safety confirmed. Silence followed. Daniel could hear only the gentle hum of the refrigerator behind him. Then a calm voice emerged from the sphere, translated instantly into flawless English. Your report has been continuously observed. Daniel's eyes widened. Observed. Lasara slowly turned toward him. There was genuine apology in her expression. Daniel, there is something I should have explained sooner. He waited quietly. From the moment I arrived on your doorstep, every interaction has been witnessed by the Celestial Accord. She hesitated. Not only by scientists, by diplomats, historians, educators, and representatives from thousands of inhabited worlds. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. You mean, all of them watched me make coffee? A faint smile crossed her face. They watched everything. Daniel rubbed his forehead and laughed quietly despite himself. Well, that is embarrassing. The voice from the sphere spoke again, calm and measured. Human Daniel Brooks, your concern is not embarrassment. It is authenticity. That distinction carries extraordinary significance. Daniel looked uncertainly toward the glowing projection. I was just trying to be polite. Precisely, the voice replied. You acted without expectation of reward, recognition, or strategic advantage. Lasara stepped beside him. Our first contact protocol has never depended upon governments. Daniel looked at her with growing confusion. Then what does it depend on? She answered almost in a whisper. Character. The room fell completely silent. Outside, Mrs. Henderson carefully watered flowers along her front walkway, while two children raced past on bicycles, laughing without the slightest idea that the future of their planet had quietly entered a new chapter. Inside the modest living room, the voice continued. Every emerging civilization receives the same evaluation. Advanced technology can be measured. Military capability can be calculated. Scientific knowledge can be exchanged. Compassion cannot. Daniel looked down at his hands, still damp from washing breakfast dishes. They were the same rough hands that repaired furnaces, carried groceries for elderly neighbors, and threw tennis balls for Cooper every evening. Nothing about them seemed remarkable. Yet somehow those ordinary hands had become the first human example presented before an audience of civilizations scattered across the stars. Lasara folded her hands respectfully before her. The first door opened to an envoy becomes the symbolic heart of an entire world. Such has been our tradition for over 6,000 years. Daniel slowly looked around his small living room, at the worn couch, the family photographs, Cooper sleeping peacefully beneath the window, and the blanket still folded neatly where Lasara had left it. None of it looked extraordinary. Yet beyond Earth's blue sky, countless distant worlds had just learned that humanity's first greeting to the unknown had not begun with fear, power, or suspicion. It had begun with an open door, a warm meal, and a simple invitation to come inside. No one spoke for several long seconds after the final words faded from the sphere. The silence inside Daniel's living room felt larger than the room itself, stretching beyond the walls, beyond the neighborhood, and somehow reaching into the stars. Then the calm voice returned one final time. First Envoy Lasara, the evaluation has concluded. Recommendation. Lasara did not answer immediately. She looked around the modest house one last time. The faded family photograph above the fireplace. The worn couch where a stranger had been welcomed without hesitation. The empty teacup still resting on the wooden table. The folded blanket Daniel had offered before asking a single question. Finally, she turned toward him. When I departed my home, I believed I was traveling to evaluate an emerging civilization. Her voice grew softer. Instead, I discovered a family before I found a planet. She faced the glowing sphere. My recommendation is unanimous. Daniel blinked. Unanimous? There is only one of you. A gentle smile appeared on her face. Not anymore. The sphere brightened until the entire room glowed with soft silver light. The distant voice answered, recommendation accepted. Outside, the brilliant point of light that had remained motionless above Colorado suddenly began descending. It moved without sound, without flames, and without disturbing a single cloud. Neighbors stepped onto their porches, shielding their eyes from the impossible radiance hanging silently above the valley. Children pointed toward the sky. Cars slowed to a stop along quiet streets. News helicopters had not yet arrived. Government aircraft were still hundreds of miles away. For one extraordinary moment, the whole world simply watched. The lights separated into dozens of graceful shapes that settled high above the neighborhood like floating stars. They did not aim weapons. They did not issue demands. They waited. The sphere before Daniel dissolved into countless tiny lights, replaced by a final message. Human Daniel Brooks, according to the First Contact Charter of the Celestial Accord, the first home that welcomes an envoy in peace becomes forever recognized as sacred ground. Daniel stared in disbelief. "My house. Your home," the voice corrected gently. "From this day forward, every future diplomatic mission to Earth shall begin where the first door was opened." Lasara's eyes shimmered with quiet emotion. "The navigation error was real," she admitted. "But our oldest tradition teaches that chance often reveals character more honestly than careful planning." Daniel slowly shook his head. "So I really was the wrong door." Lasara smiled and looked toward the front entrance. "No, Daniel." She walked to the doorway where everything had begun less than a day earlier and rested her hand upon the familiar brass handle. The navigation system found the wrong address. She looked back at him. It found exactly the right human. Moments later, the front door opened once again. This time it revealed not darkness and rain, but a quiet avenue of silver lights stretching from the porch into the morning sky. Elegant figures stepped forward one by one, each placing a hand over their heart before respectfully bowing toward the modest white house. None crossed the threshold until Daniel nodded with the same simple kindness he had shown Lasara the night before. They entered as guests, not conquerors. Years later, historians on Earth would write about the first contact between humanity and another civilization. They would describe the ships, the broadcasts, the treaties, and the astonishing discoveries that followed. Yet among the countless worlds of the Celestial Accord, children learned a different story. They learned that the greatest turning point in interstellar history did not begin inside a palace, a laboratory, or a government building. It began when an ordinary man opened an ordinary front door to a stranger standing in the rain. Long after Daniel Brooks had grown old, every newly appointed envoy preparing to visit an unfamiliar world followed one unbreakable tradition inspired by Earth. Before speaking of science, before discussing alliances, before negotiating peace, they first knocked politely upon a single door. And somewhere in the grand hall of first encounters, beneath the flags of thousands of civilizations, the very first exhibit was not a weapon, a crown, or a starship. It was a weathered brass house key beside a simple inscription that every child in the galaxy could recite by heart. Humanity changed the stars because one man believed that every unexpected guest deserved to be welcomed inside.